Welcome back to the channel, folks. Don't you just love this time of year? Fall is easily my favorite season. That great time of year with cooler weather, when the leaves change color, and we got tons of pumpkin beer. It's also spooky season, which means I'll watch slasher flicks like Friday the 13th, more kid-friendly horror stuff like Goosebumps, or just watch the antics of the OG goth mommy, Elvira. I could just watch her antics on loop 24/7. Oh, and play some horror video games too. Something I haven't done in quite a while. And by a while, I mean like 2 months. Because I forgot how recent my Manhunt video was released. Man, how time flies. Go watch that video, by the way. When I stay in on a cold October night and decide to play a horror game, I'll go with classics like Resident Evil or Dead Space. Though there was this one rainy Halloween when my friend canceled his party, so I spent the night playing The Evil Within instead. Man, oh man, what a frustrating experience that was. Maybe I'll talk about it one day. Instead, today, I've decided to play a game I've completely overlooked during its original release in the 360 and PS3 era. A game I knew nothing about and didn't even know of its existence until a few years back when I saw a video on it. Condemned Criminal Origins. Being the person that I am, I was intrigued, immediately bought it, and then never played it. Like a lot of games that have been sitting in my Steam library for years, I swore to myself that I'd get around to playing it eventually, but never found the time until now. I'll skip the usual rhetorical question about the game's quality and just dive right in.
Thomas, I don't got all day here. Let's get a move on.
People are scared. We need to get this one. Follow me. Body's this way.
Condemned Criminal Origins is a first-person psychological horror game taking place in the rundown and crime-ridden Metro City, a place that's gotten even worse as of late due to a strange phenomenon causing the local bird population to drop dead and fall out of the sky, while also causing addicts and the homeless in the city to become even more violent and aggressive. We play as Ethan Thomas, a FBI detective on the trail of a gruesome serial killer known as the Matchmaker. Arriving at the scene of the serial killer's latest victim, not everything is what it seems, as Ethan will be plagued by psychic visions that seem to implicate a much more dangerous figure behind everything that's going on. As I previously mentioned in the LA Noire video, our boy Ethan here is voiced by Greg Grunberg, who would go on to play psychic police officer Matt Parkman on Heroes a year after this game's release. You know, during an era of gaming where main characters would be over-designed or too edgy, it's refreshing to see Ethan Thomas look so basic. Like seriously, there's nothing distinct about him at all. If you showed me a picture of his concept art and I didn't know who he was already, I'd be hard-pressed to figure out what game he was from, let alone assume he's your main character and not some generic enemy or NPC. It's not really a criticism though. In fact, Ethan's rather normal and boring appearances to the game's benefit, as it really harkens back to older survival horror games like Silent Hill, selling the image of a normal person out of their depth in a world of madness. It's unfortunate he got the generic emo edge boy makeover for the sequel, but that's a discussion for another time. Condemned Criminal Origins offers a unique blend of first-person gameplay and forensic investigation. Combat is almost entirely melee-based, having you attack enemies using mundane items laying around like 2x4s or pipes, to more traditional weapons like fire axes or sledgehammers. Each weapon has 4 stats that determine their effectiveness in combat, divided up into damage, swing speed, effectiveness at blocking, and how far it can reach. Fights boil down to trading blows with enemies, getting your hits in, moving back or blocking to avoid their hits, until finally they go down. Man, that combat feels so good. A combination of the sound made when hitting an enemy with a weapon, to the sounds they make and how they react to hits gives some nice weight to the combat. It may look like it's simple and repetitive, but the different enemy types you fight, combined with their impressive AI, keeps fights interesting throughout. For one, the psychos you're fighting will often throw feints, tricking you into blocking too early and leaving yourself open to get hit. They tend to put distance between themselves and you, running behind cover to save themselves or lying in wait to ambush you if they got far enough ahead. If disarmed during combat, they'll actively look around the area and tear pipes and other objects off the wall to arm themselves again. This also includes looting the weapons off of any dead enemies in the immediate area, or any weapons you drop too, including firearms. Despite the heavy melee focus, you do have the option for shooting, but it's extremely limited compared to what you'd see in other first-person shooters. For one, firearms are rare to come by, typically popping up towards the end of a level, if at all, and other times being hidden away behind an optional door you need to come back to. While they pack the power you'd expect and are much more effective at neutralizing a target in comparison to a board with a nail in it, you won't get to use a gun for long due to their limited ammo. All you have is whatever bullets are left in the gun, as enemies won't drop more ammo, and you won't find more spare ammo lying around either. Since your shots are limited, you might want to hold on to a gun to use later in the level, or on a tougher enemy, but you really can't, as Ethan can only hold one weapon at a time, and will instantly drop whatever he has equipped anytime he stumbles onto something new. And since an enemy can pick up and use a firearm against you if it still has ammo, you're basically forced to use any gun immediately after finding it. While this system makes gunplay underwhelming, it does keep the player from trivializing every encounter by headshotting every hobo that charges them. It also keeps tension high and avoids disrupting the horror atmosphere by turning Ethan into Rambo after he finds a gun. Though the game does give you something to trivialize encounters, and that's the taser. Just pull that sucker out, take aim, and zap these strung out junkies, stunning them enough to get a free hit or two on them. It's great in situations where you're up against multiple enemies, but due to its recharge time, you can't abuse it to endlessly stun everyone in the room. Not at first anyhow, as about halfway through the game, it'll get upgraded to the Super Taser, which recharges faster, drops enemies to the ground to finish off easier, and can outright one-shot weaker enemies. The difficulty of the game goes right out the window once you get your hands on this thing, even as you go up against beefier psychos or more of them carrying guns. The devs must have realized how broken it was though, as you end up losing the taser before the final level. Overall, I'd say the combat is solid and remains engaging throughout. There's a decent level of challenge that isn't too overwhelming, assuming you're not abusing the taser, or abusing the enemy AI, as the homeless of Metro City aren't exactly a tight-knit group, as they'll just as often damage each other, or just fight each other instead of going after Ethan. It's too bad that the investigation half of the gameplay doesn't really measure up. Several times throughout the game, you'll stumble upon a crime scene and need to make use of your investigation tools to gather evidence, which is then sent to Ethan's contact in the crime lab, Rosa. Your toolkit includes a UV light that can illuminate the presence of blood and other organic samples, a laser light that can highlight trace elements in a scene, exposing fingerprints and DNA samples, a gas spectrometer that can pick up strange odors in the air, the bars of light on it illuminating the closer you are to the source, and finally a camera to take photos of the crime scene. Despite these different tools, the investigation system is just way too simple. The game will always prompt you when it's time to use one of your tools, and automatically uses the right one when needed, as opposed to trying different tools until you can find one that works. Outside of one instance late in the game, it's never used in a creative way like solving puzzles. Instead, it's more like an interactive cutscene that tells us more about the serial killer we're chasing. The gas spectrometer gets a little more mileage as it can be used to help track down one of the game's collectibles, dead birds. Though outside of the score at the end of a level, and an achievement I guess, there's no real reason to actually seek out collectibles, as all they unlock is concept art. Maybe if the game was longer and wasn't so linear, the investigation tools could have been better utilized. Like I said, maybe making them necessary to solve puzzles and find clues on where to go next, or maybe discover secret clues that can change the ending. It could have added some much needed variety to the gameplay, as outside of combat and investigations, all you really have is some sections where you have to push a lever, turn off a valve, or find the right weapon to get through a door or lock.
The patrolman on duty said there was a mannequin involved, just like the matchmaker. Whole damn city's crawling with sick killers.
Swinging back to the story, Ethan's been brought in on a crime scene believed to be the work of a serial killer known as the Matchmaker. The psycho loves murdering young women and then posing their corpses with male department store mannequins. Said mannequins are all disfigured the same way, which Ethan hypothesizes are meant to reflect the killer's own appearance. though Rosa and the department haven't found someone with a similar scar yet. But the matchmaker may be closer than expected, as Detective Dickinson, who is there with Ethan and the patrol officer who found the body, spots a suspect fleeing from the scene. Those two will take after him up the fire escape, while Ethan has to go solo through the rundown building, taking a detour to get the power on, before he ends up losing his gun during a brief encounter with the suspect. This gross negligence in securing his weapon ends up biting Ethan in the ass badly when he comes face to face with the killer.
How does it feel to be on this end of the gun? But listen, you bastard. Don't mess this up for us. We are both on the same path of righteousness.
Thomas!
And the path takes strange turns.
Freeze! Police! Drop the weapon now!
Be ready for death, Agent Thomas. It shall come visiting again.
After a brief little nightmare jump scare, Ethan wakes up in his apartment, greeted by an old detective friend of his father, Malcolm Van Horn. Van Horn just so happened to be near the crime scene when Ethan was tossed out the window, and helped get him back to his apartment. Well, that was awfully nice of him. Though he probably should have, I don't know, called an ambulance and secured the scene to tell the police what happened, as due to the killer using Ethan's gun to kill his fellow officers, he's now being implicated in their deaths. Ethan rightfully wants to head to the bureau and tell them what happened, but Van Horn talks him out of it as he claims the department has already decided he's guilty. I was going to rip into how Ethan being framed by the killer was a little stupid, as Detective Dickinson and the patrolman with him would have radioed the department that they were chasing a suspect. So even with the guy using Ethan's gun, the police would have been more likely to suspect that guy over one of their own. Not to mention the fact that killer's prints should be all over the handgun. But the story frames this scene more like the cops trying to make Ethan the fall guy for some kind of cover-up, as opposed to genuinely believing he's a murderer. Out of options, Ethan is forced to go on the run, but Van Horn promises to help him in discovering the truth. Thankfully, he also still has Rose's assistance, who isn't convinced Ethan did it either. Sending her a picture of some discarded photos we find in a trash can, she IDs them as pictures of Ethan in his apartment. Looks like someone may have been stalking him. Also, really, Ethan? Did you really need Rose's help there? You couldn't recognize your own apartment from the photos by looking at them? I don't have the highest expectations that Ethan's going to be able to discover the truth and clear his name if he's this inept. Finding a substance smeared on the photos, Rosa identifies it as a chemical used in photo labs to process film. With that as our clue, we'll follow a trail of the substance into the abandoned building across from Ethan's apartment, fighting off the homeless population of Metro City along the way. Referred to as addicts by the Condemned Wiki, these guys will be the standard enemy type we encounter throughout most of the game. There's nothing particularly special to them, though the game does have different variants of them that are dressed differently from one another. As I brought up before, they have no regard for each other's safety, and will injure each other when going after Ethan. They can be surprisingly effective at ambushing you though, as they won't always engage you when you enter an area, and will instead run off to hide. If you're not paying attention or looking in their general direction when they're skulking around, it's easy to miss them. Especially since unlike other horror games, there isn't a sound cue that's played when you're attacked, or for when an enemy is nearby, or if anything spooky in general happens. The game's sound design is probably its greatest aspect, as the sounds of your footsteps over different surfaces, and the sounds from the environment around you create a tense atmosphere that can feel chilling at times, with things like the sound of the wind or heavy machinery in some levels masking the sounds of any nearby enemies, actually spooking me a few times when I got attacked out of nowhere. No flashing effect or loud jump scare noise needed. Going through the abandoned building, we get a psychic vision that shows us Ethan's stalker exiting a secret room behind a shelf. You know, I didn't realize these visions were actually visions at first. I kinda thought they were just a framing device for the player's sake. I only bring it up because no one in the game, not even Ethan, acknowledges that he sees these visions. All you get is his groaning and heavy breathing after everything goes back to normal, so it's easy to overlook that Ethan has some kind of psychic power. The only one who has some kind of understanding of it is Van Horn, who credits Ethan's successful career as being less a product of training or skill, and more because of instinct. Though I think that was probably the writer's intention, that Ethan is completely unaware of his power, and that Van Horn knows a lot more than he's letting on. Searching the secret room, we find more photos and recording equipment, lucking out by getting a handprint but not finding a match in the criminal database. Whoever is stalking Ethan has also been tracking his career, as there are several newspaper clippings up on the wall detailing the cases he's worked on. We'll soon run into our stalker pal and chase him around the building, eventually following him down into the abandoned subway station. But not before we get this scene of a bunch of crows flying through the windows in slow motion. I don't know why, but for some reason this scene just really reminds me of Max Payne. Is there a similar scene like this in that game? It's been a while since I played it, so I can't really remember. I should probably just play it for the channel soon. Heading through the dingy station, we'll end up walking through some subway tunnels after our suspect knocked us off a subway train. Man, Ethan must be made of iron. You'd think he'd take more damage after falling off a moving train. Down here, we'll encounter a new enemy variant, crawlers. These emaciated crack addicts that, you guessed it, crawl around on all fours. Except for the female variants, who just run around screaming at you instead. They're fast, and during this section we'll be seen moving around some scaffolding above Ethan to try and ambush him. But they're rather puny, easily going down in one hit from any weapon or the super taser. There's also these bigger and beefier guys down here called sandhogs. Decked out in goggles and fireman jackets, they tower over Ethan, soak up a lot of damage, and usually swing around the heavier weapons like sledgehammers or fire axes. While they hit like a truck, they're also very slow, so as long as you don't get greedy with your hits and back off before they can counter, they go down rather easily. After getting through the subway, we'll chase our stalker down into the sewer tunnels and get a DNA sample from some of his sweat, confirming he's the same guy who framed Ethan for killing those two cops. Something both the player and Ethan already know by this point, but now we have a way to prove his innocence, assuming we can catch the killer. After finding the guy's workshop, and then his strange secret stash of mannequin arms, we trace his location to an abandoned department store. On the train ride over, Ethan has an unpleasant conversation with his boss who calls him to tell him to turn himself in. While our boy still pleads his innocence, his boss just outright calls him crazy, claiming that clearly Ethan snapped under the pressure of his job. As the detective gets angrier and distracted by the call, he neglects to see the weird demon creature from his nightmare about to pounce on him.
Maybe I have gone crazy.
Could the demon be a manifestation of the force driving people in the city crazy, slowly working its effect on Ethan? Or maybe some kind of darkness in Ethan that's slowly coming to the surface, possibly hinting that he isn't as innocent like he claims to be? Guess we'll have to wait and see. The abandoned department store might genuinely be the creepiest level of the entire game. It's very quiet at first as you start to explore the area, with none of the usual addicts you've been killing anywhere to be seen. At first, all you spot are old Christmas decorations and a couple of department store mannequins. Well, until you stumble on the body of one, with a message to leave hanging from his corpse as a warning to Ethan. This is when you'll finally know you aren't alone, as if you turn around after walking past the body, you'll spot this. Disguised as mannequins, this new enemy type brings a new level of paranoia to the rest of the level, as they'll quietly watch you while blending in with real mannequins, often staying out of your scuffles with the regular addicts you can still encounter, only pouncing on you when you have your back turned or you suss them out first. While not tougher than the average enemy, the game will feed off the dread about being attacked at any moment by scattering mannequins everywhere. So every new room you enter, you won't be sure if you're safe or need to knock everything down first, just in case. It's a great way to create paranoia in the player, though I think it would have been better if the enemies didn't give themselves away immediately if you attack them. Maybe make it so you have to hit them a few times or something. That way you can trick the player into thinking they're safe if they hit them once and nothing. Towards the end of the level, we find another crime scene and victim supposedly staged by the matchmaker. Though, unlike the first crime scene at the beginning, it's a reverse of his usual MO, with a male victim posing with a female mannequin this time. Investigating the corpse, we find he has the same scar that was carved into the male mannequins, and that he's also missing his right index finger, just like a handprint we found in the first crime scene. Ladies and gentlemen, we've found the matchmaker. Or what's left of him anyhow. Since the guy we've been chasing around for most of the game doesn't look like this guy, it seems we have a completely different killer on the loose. Rosa will call later after taking another look at the photos of the newspaper clippings we sent her. Each clipping revolved around a different case and killer that Ethan was working on. 7 out of his 9 cases haven't gone cold, with 7 clippings crossed out with marker. We got ourselves a Dexter situation, as the unknown guy we've been chasing around has been killing all the serial killers Ethan was investigating. Going a step further, our perp, now dubbed Serial Killer X, or just SKX for short, took down the other killers using their own methods. Having taken care of the matchmaker, he's only got one guy left, the cleverly named serial killer known as the Torturer, who likes to kidnap, and you guessed it, torture his victims, before hunting them for sport, driving them crazy until they've had enough and end their own lives. So a weird mix of Jigsaw and Kraven the Hunter, I guess, but nowhere near as cool as either. Since we know who XKX will be going after next, we'll have to track down the Torturer before he ends up getting his ironic comeuppance. Heading to the city library to meet Rosa in person, and to look up the information we need to look for the Torturer, she fills Ethan in on a case file she's found on him. Our boy here isn't exactly normal. For one, he has a higher than normal bone and muscle density, explaining how Ethan can trade blows with all the crazies we've been fighting, along with how he can walk off just about any damage he takes. He also has some abnormalities going on with his brain, which probably explains his psychic visions, and he's got something unusual going on with his throat. Whatever it is has been redacted from his X-ray and file, locked behind the highest of security clearance. Is Ethan some kind of super soldier? A half-human, half-demon hybrid? Or the perfect vessel for an ancient evil known as the Lightbringer? Who knows? While this information lays the groundwork towards explaining Ethan's abilities and setting up a greater conspiracy, it doesn't actually answer many questions by the end of the game, something I'll circle back to at the end. During our little library trip, we'll dig up info related to the Torturer case, finding a news clip about how a PE teacher named Samuel Tibbetts came to the police with information on the serial killer, recalling one of his former students had shared his disturbing fantasies with him that matched the Torturer's MO. He believes his true identity to be Carl Anderson. Apparently, the cops didn't take Carl Anderson in for questioning, or try to keep Tibbetts' identity a secret either, as he's gone missing after talking to them. Searching the library records and discovering the name of the school where both Anderson and Tibbetts attended, we now know our next destination. Unfortunately, so does SKX, as he was watching us this entire time, and letting us do all that boring research in order to find out the Torturer's location. Arriving at the abandoned school, Carl Anderson has already started his little game with Mr. Tibbetts, as we'll stumble upon the poor bastard's lips while investigating the area. This level introduces our first boss character, sorta, a big old lady referred to as the Butcher. As you're wandering around the school, you'll occasionally catch glimpses of her ordering around and sicking enemies on you before she takes off, until you finally catch up to her for a proper fight. She was apparently a lunch lady at the school before going crazy. Maybe? Like, it's never really explained in-game, nor does she offer any explanation for who she is and why she's even here. Hell, Ethan doesn't even have some dialogue acknowledging her as anything different from the dozens of homeless he's killed by now. She feels a little out of place here, and like the devs wanted to shake things up with a new enemy type and encounter, but didn't properly tie it into their story. The Butcher is basically just a reskin of the beefier Sandhog enemies, just with some unique dialogue and her own unique weapon with the cleaver. The only reason I consider her a boss is because I can't proceed with the level until I kill her, take her cleaver, and then lop off the hand of some corpse to get the fire axe to proceed through a door, which is really convoluted and stupid. And the other reason is because of how fast she can kill you and how many hits it takes to kill her. Like, holy shit, this bitch just refuses to go down. I honestly thought I was doing something wrong, and there was some special trick I was supposed to do to kill her. But nah, I just gotta keep whacking at her. Maybe it would have been easier if I had brought my gun with me, but I wasted all my ammo on the previous enemy encounter. After killing Lunch Lady Doris and moving further through the school, Ethan finds another piece of Mr. Tibbetts. This time his arm. Ouch. Well, he's probably dead by now. Don't imagine the poor bastard could survive long from losing his arm. If he didn't immediately die from shock, he definitely bled out by now. Oh well, I'll avenge you, Mr. Tibbetts. Heading outside, we'll experience another demon guy hallucination as Ethan finds his own dead body. Is he going crazy like everyone else in this city? Is his own inner demon about to take full control of him? Who knows? I like the ambiguity and that the game isn't just spoon-feeding me what's going on yet. I just wish Ethan had more of an opinion on it. It's easy to forget sometimes that he isn't a silent protagonist, as he never has much to say about the shit going on around him outside of cutscenes. I get that it's a little too easy to have him say too much and give away what's happening, but small stuff like acknowledging he sees the demon guy, or just telling someone about it would be enough. Might just be me, but I want a little bit more from Ethan when he has these hallucinations outside of his heavy breathing and occasionally puking. After going through the school's shower and locker room, we stumble upon Mr. Tibbets. Or what's left of him. Poor bastard. Well, nothing to do now but to collect some evidence and get back to looking for the torturer.
Help me.
Help is on the way. Who did this to you?
Carl Anderson.
The torturer. Okay, take it easy. Do you know where he is now?
Despite that little jump scare, Tibbet still ends up dying anyways, but not before he fills us in on where the torturer is. After hiding in the locker room we find him in, he saw the torturer getting jumped and abducted by our buddy SKX. The killer unfortunately didn't loudly monologue where he was going to take the torturer, but thanks to some forensic work from Rosa, we discovered that XKX had some kind of pesticide residue on his hands when he strangled the matchmaker. Combined with the clues Ethan discovered in previous levels, they deduced that SKX may be using an abandoned apple orchard in the town of Briar as his base of operations. This is when Van Horn will finally reappear in person, offering us a ride up to the orchard. Like before, the old man is acting strange, so much so that Ethan is finally catching on that Van Horn may know more about what's going on than he lets on. He doesn't get much time to grill him before the pair arrive and separate, Ethan investigating the abandoned house on the property, while Van Horn heads to the nearby barn. This level essentially has the only puzzle in the game, as we have to use the UV light to follow different trails of writing throughout the house to find pieces of the answer to the riddle. The first answer is written on a sink down in the basement, the second is on the second floor in a closet, the third is up in the attic, but before we can retrieve it, the demon guy shows up again, and this time we actually fight him. Unlike every other enemy so far, he's very acrobatic in how he fights, moving and kind of looking like a martial artist as he does several spins, flips, and twirls the pieces of rebar he's holding before attacking. He doesn't hit too hard, and is probably about as durable as your average addict, but his crazy movements make it harder to predict his attacks and guard properly against them. After he pieces out and I grab the answer up here, I'll find the final piece in the oven in the kitchen downstairs. I should point out you can find these answers in any order, and most likely you were supposed to go to the attic last to make the fight against the demon make more sense, but it took me a while to find that last clue as I didn't realize you could open the oven in the kitchen. Putting the clues together, we get the phrase, "The dark path to righteousness is beyond which you see yourself to be." The answer to what was written on the wall is essentially another riddle, but to the game's credit, it doesn't instantly tell you where to go and expects you to figure it out. If you are paying attention while wandering around in the basement for a clue, you would have noticed a big wardrobe with a mirror on it. Head down there, interact with it, and boom, secret room. A super underwhelming secret room, as all we find are more photos of Ethan and more newspaper clippings chronicling his career. Like, didn't we already do the exact same thing of establishing SKX was stalking Ethan for a while, when we found the secret room in the building across from Ethan's place? The room didn't really tell us anything new about the guy, or explain his motives any better. Feels like a real missed opportunity to understand what's going on with SKX outside of his boner for Ethan. After reviewing the evidence with Rosa, we'll hear a noise upstairs, and when heading up to investigate, we see blood smears all over the kitchen as someone has broken into the house.
God, please. I can't take this anymore. My ears. My hands.
Whoever that guy was must be the Flash or something, as I didn't even catch a glimpse of him as he ran upstairs and blocked my path by pushing down a piano. After fighting a small wave of enemies around the house until one drops a fire axe, I cut the piano loose, shove it aside, and find who I was chasing. Turns out it was the torturer. Having been subjected to the same brutality he unleashed on his own victims, he couldn't stand the torture anymore, and ended it. SKX soon arrives, still on the hunt for the torturer, and unaware he's already succeeded in killing the guy. giving Ethan the perfect chance to ambush him.
Ah, Carl. You've given up.
Wait for it.
It's a shame.
Wait for it.
Now, perhaps you know what you have put others through. Although it makes you even more pathetic that you weren't brave enough to kill yourself. Now I'll have to do the job and make it look right. So sad.
Now!
You shouldn't have come here.
Holy shit, this fight is annoying. I wouldn't really call this a boss fight, as SKX fights the exact same way as your generic addict enemy. This asshole just refuses to stay still, so you have to run around trying to catch him, or wait somewhere till he circles back and you can just wail on him. It wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for Ethan's sprint. I've been saving talking about it until now, but Ethan has to have one of the worst sprint mechanics in all of gaming. He doesn't sprint all that fast to begin with, which hasn't been a problem until now, and probably would have made it too easy to run from enemies considering how slow they are. However, the problem is that Ethan's sprint gauge depletes really fast and takes forever to recharge, so he'll be out of breath almost immediately when trying to chase after SKX. So it creates a situation where you're stopping constantly to charge your stamina, meaning you lose sight of SKX, and have to wait for him to run back or hope you run back into him as you circle the area. Essentially, most of the fight is really just running around, then actually fighting SKX. Really ruining what should have been a climactic moment of Ethan confronting and fighting the main antagonist. To rub more salt in the wound, we don't actually defeat SKX either.
Leland! Nephew, please listen to me. I am here to help. You are not yourself. You are not in your right mind. Let me help you. I know of what I speak.
So, as it turns out, Van Horn did know more than he let on, as SKX has been his nephew Leland this entire time. Ethan will wake up sometime later, now strung up on the wall of a barn, as our serial killer buddy decides to monologue at us. And once again, he tells us something we already know, explaining that he stalked Ethan and followed his career in order to kill the serial killers he was after. Like, why? This is the third time it's being explained to the player. Did the developers worry we still wouldn't get it by this point? What's worse is that SKX spends time telling us what he did, but not why. The scene implies that he's under the influence of the demon we keep seeing, as the guy is just chilling up here, watching Ethan about to die. Van Horn goes on to support that theory when he saves Ethan and subdues his nephew, telling him he has to kill it and that it's responsible for everything. It just feels extremely clunky, as nothing up until this point implied Leland Van Horn wasn't just doing all of this out of his own free will. I get not wanting to give away your twist, but you have to put in a little more work so it makes sense and isn't tacked on. That secret room in the abandoned house was a perfect place to do it. Have some symbols or pictures that resemble the demon up on the wall, or in some papers you find. Pepper in just a little info before the reveal so it doesn't just feel like a twist for the sake of a twist. This final level is easily the hardest of the whole game, as it throws a lot of strong enemies at you at once, which are much tougher to manage now that you don't have the taser. Not to mention you'll have a few fights with the rebar-wielding demon guys too. Eventually you'll finally catch up to the thing supposedly behind everything, who sorta resembles the previous demon creatures, except he has a sword and a lot more metal attached to his face and body. You first have to fight off a wave of enemies before you can fight him. He's less acrobatic than the other demon, but can be pretty quick with his sword strikes. Once you do enough damage, he'll fall to his knees and you need to run up to him and yank the metal off his body. He'll then hop up to the second floor and you'll repeat the same fight. Then do it again after you rip off more metal. Only difference with the third phase is that it takes place in the black and white hallucination world, and ends with Ethan tearing off his jaw. After regrouping with Van Horn, we still have no explanation for what the hell the Cenobite guy was, what it wanted, or even how Van Horn knew it was behind all of this stuff. While Ethan is ready to move on either way, he forces Van Horn to pull over the car when he hears someone is in the trunk and realizes SKX is still alive.
Open the trunk.
Thomas, don't! He was a good boy. We were all good people. We were able to fight it back, most of us. My nephew was not as strong. He fell victim and destroyed so many things. We fought to save him. I must continue to do so.
I don't care whether the sick fuck is in his right mind or not.
Think of what you are doing. Both of you have a chance for redemption.
Angry, Ethan is ready to kill and finally finish off the serial killer who ruined his life. However, Van Horn begs him not to, claiming Leland wasn't always like this, and fell to the madness caused by the demon guy. As things come to a head, Van Horn prepares to kill Ethan to save his nephew, and then more demon hallucinations pop up, and you're given the choice of killing or sparing SKX. Except not really, because regardless of your choice, everything turns out exactly the same. Kinda like a Telltale game. Put a bullet through the guy, it cuts to black, and then moves to the final scene of the game with Rosa and Ethan in a diner. Spare the guy, and he breaks free of his bindings, pulls a gun out of nowhere, and then he shoots himself in the head and we cut to the same diner scene. Like, why even give us a choice in the first place if everything ends the same regardless? It's just so stupid. The final cutscene doesn't do us any favors either, as Ethan is still wanted by the Bureau, and Malcolm Van Horn and his nephew Leland are both missing. Rosa then casually drops that everything that happened may have been orchestrated by some evil cult before she leaves, and Ethan gives us a little jump scare before the credits. And that was Condemned Criminal Origins. I gotta be honest, I walked away from this game feeling extremely mixed. While I really enjoyed the combat, and the gritty and terrifying atmosphere it creates for its world, and the game's story was intriguing at first, the way it played out and ended was just terrible. You have two plots playing at once. One is your standard police story of a detective investigating a mysterious serial killer. The other is the mystery of the strange phenomenon that's killing the local bird population and driving people crazy and making them violent. Both plots, on paper, can easily elevate the other and work together to paint a picture of what's going on, but the writers completely dropped the ball on making it work. The mystery of what's driving people in the city crazy sits in the background for way too long. It's never treated as important as the hunt for SKX, or even hinted that there's a connection until the very end of the game. Since everyone affected by this mysterious force has devolved into aggressive and barely verbal thugs, you wouldn't think SKX or the other serial killers are even affected, as they still have enough of their mental faculties to plan out elaborate murders. It's hard to argue that Leland Van Horn could even be under its effects, as outside of killing those two police officers, he only goes after other serial killers. He feels more like the Punisher than just another crazy being affected by some evil force. It's why Malcolm Van Horn's attempts to cover up and save him fall short. We got nothing to show what he was like before he started killing serial killers. It's also why the reveal that this Cenobite guy was behind everything and responsible for corrupting Leland Van Horn just doesn't work either. It feels like it was thrown in at the end to try to tie both plots together, but with no build-up or explanation of what this guy's deal is. We don't know what he's called, if he's literally a demon or some kind of evil god. Why does everyone else turn into raving lunatics and Leland Van Horn just kill other serial killers? Also, what's the deal with Ethan's weird biology? It's brought up once and never addressed ever again. Because everything's barely explained, it makes the line at the end of some cult being involved also feel like it was thrown in. It doesn't feel like a story trying to set up a greater mystery or keep the player on their feet guessing what's happening. More like the writers weren't happy with the first draft of their story and kept adding more and more to it without bothering to make it fit. Not everything needs to be answered by the end of the game, but put enough in there that it can make sense. Instead of telling us that Leland Van Horn wasn't always crazy and is being manipulated by that evil force, show us. Make him Ethan's childhood friend or something. Maybe when Ethan first talks to Van Horn in his apartment, he asks about his old buddy and reminisces with Malcolm about how they were good friends. Show that demon guy pop up a few times when SKX is out doing his thing and Ethan isn't around. Shit, that even adds a bit more weight to Ethan's choice on whether or not he should kill the guy at the end. Should he spare his old friend gone crazy? Or is he too far gone and better off dead? If a cult is really behind summoning that demon guy, put some cult-like imagery in Leland's secret room, or around his abandoned house. Don't even need to bring attention to it. That way the player can replay the game and be like, oh, maybe there is a cult, when they take another look and find that stuff. I know all of these questions get addressed in the sequel, but does it do it in a way that makes you think the writers had a bigger plan at hand? Or were they forced to try and fix the mess this game created? Like I said before, I feel mixed about Condemned Criminal Origins, and this might be one of the only times where how I ultimately feel about a game comes down to how the sequel turns out. Does Bloodshot pick up on the plot threads from this game and explains them in a satisfying way that makes everything work? Or does it have the same issue of trying to explain inconsistencies and ends up making them worse? Considering the mixed response the sequel got, with opinions all over the place in terms of whether it's better or worse than the original, I'm interested in finding out one day. But that's a discussion for a different day. And that's the video. Thanks for watching, guys. Fell a few days behind working on this video. I planned to have it out Monday, but I just wasn't feeling all that great over the weekend. Currently running a poll for the third game of the month. Not sure who's won yet, but all 3 titles are short enough where I can get a video done by Halloween. After that, we're diving into some big stuff again. Kicking off with the original Yakuza on PS2, and then Watch Dogs. As we edge closer to the holidays, I'm excited to finish off the year with some great games I've been holding off on. I'm also still planning on releasing the GTA Trilogy compilation video next month too. Again, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and comment down below. How do you feel about Condemned Criminal Origins? Do you agree with my gripes about the story? Is the sequel better or worse in your opinion? Feel free to tell me your thoughts. And if you're new to my channel, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed, as I'm hoping to cross 50,000 subs before the year ends. Be sure to check out the recommended video and playlist here at the end. Catch you guys later as I spend my entire weekend playing Spider-Man 2. I'm FuzzySlippers, and I'll see you later. Peace.